Coming across Golden Bridge, it was like, nobody. it was like,
Ready to go on the set, Donna.
Okay, great. All right, we'll go ahead and open up the meeting here. The regular meeting of the Audit Finance Committee at TCE. We have Maura. I'll go ahead and call it to order. Do we need to do a roll call or, okay, please.
Burlingame,
Donna Colson.
East Palo Alto, Hillsborough,
Murphy, right here.
Portola Valley, San Bruno.
Marty, good evening.
Thank you, and we have a form.
All righty, chair report. The only thing I really have to report, and maybe Andy and Sean can elaborate on, is we are doing a search for CFO. So poor Andy doesn't have to work forever for us.
Donna, sorry, one moment, sorry to interrupt.
Oh,
We gotta hit
How
public comment.
oh, sorry, public comment. Sorry, I skipped over. Do you have any public comment? No, today?
How'd you like the pastry, Max?
Very good. Pastry's good. Okay,
You
good
can't
job, Matt.
answer that question without putting that, submitting a card.
All right, good job, Matt. All right, can I just get an action to set the agenda and approve the consent agenda items?
So,
Second. Thank you. All in favor?
aye. Or
Unanimous? Okay, regular agenda, sorry. I just didn't see the numbers there. Chair report, so the only report I have out is that we are working with John on looking for a more permanent solution to the CFO, and that seems to be moving along.
Indeed.
Yep.
I'll have more to report out at next.
Okay, great. You'll have,
Good evening, Donna.
yes, ma'am.
How is our interim?
Our interim CFO is doing a really good job. We're very happy with him. Look at him, he's not even smiling about that.
I figured I'd ask here and
And the
You
real
have to
question.
ask me, that's, you
I
didn't
think
direct
the
me
real
direct my question to
I
her.
think the real question is, how are you doing?
How
How
you
are
doing,
you
Andy?
feeling?
how are you doing?
I'm doing fine. You know, there's, I didn't want to track hours, so I'm on a retainer with the company, and some days and some weeks and some months are busier than others, but it's what I expected. So busy moments, busy days, and some days not so. I think things are keeping on track. I keep getting pulled into more and more things, fortunately or unfortunately. And then there's a active effort to implement an HR information system. So, and I happen to know a lot about HR and know a lot about how everything's integrated. So I've been pretty involved in that.
Great.
Well, I'm having a feeling that regardless of when and how we find a new CFO, we're probably gonna need some time to transition, and Andy will be around for a while until we can maybe even help troubleshoot other things, you know, down the road. You've been a terrific asset to the organization, Andy.
I'll second that.
Yeah.
We can see we've given you a lot of gray hair.
And wrinkles.
We all. Staff report, Sean, or Andy?
And me.
Sorry.
Next slide, please. So there's just two things I wanted to report and or mention or ask about. First is the audit. We've started the audit. We engaged Santi and Brinker, who's done it for about 4 years now. There's a lot of activity going on, but we're deep in the throes of it. We're trying to target October 16th, which is around the date that we did last year, to meet with the Audit Finance Committee and review draft financials and meet with the auditors. If you recall, we've done it in a path where one or two of you have met with the auditors separately. Go ahead.
Wrapper.
Oh,
Matt,
It's okay.
put the wrapper away.
It gets recorded, so it gets,
I love parenting during a public meeting. It's good.
Sorry.
no problem.
No
I
problem.
didn't even notice, but I do agree it gets recorded. And then hopefully we can meet with the auditors, or you can if you want to. Know that not everyone can meet with the auditors separately, and we excuse the staff if you want to have that. It just can't be a quorum of the Audit and Finance Committee that meets with them. So it'd be one or two of you, which is what we've done in the past if you are interested in that. And that gives you a chance to talk to them about the quality of personnel or questions or things that wouldn't be public. And then we would target October 26th board meeting to approve the final audited financials. That October, typically we've done that approval on consent because this committee has reviewed everything. If you didn't want to do it on consent, I will be flying back from London that evening and we'll miss that board meeting, so you have to do it without me. But I don't think it's necessary unless something comes up at the audit finance committee. Questions? Okay. I mentioned at the last meeting, I think, about our investment management and investment policy that we're out of compliance with the policy at the moment. And the out of compliance is that we're not allowed to have more than 20% of our assets in money market funds. And right now we have about $100 million at combined Fidelity and Schwab in money market accounts. So I started the process of talking to Schwab and Fidelity about a laddered investment portfolio, the same way we've done the others. And then I had a follow-on call with PFM about what they thought and what's next steps. And Monique, who's been very helpful and knowledgeable, and does a lot of local municipalities, tells me that that's a government code issue in terms of the 20%, that it's not a PCE policy, but we're following the government code, not to have more than 20%, which seems ridiculous. So what I asked her to do, and she started to prepare, is a presentation to educate us on what the policies are and what our alternatives are and what she would recommend we do. And her recommendation, our next meeting isn't scheduled until October. And she recommended that we have the discussion before the end of the quarter in case we wanted to do something that put us more in compliance before the end of the quarter. And that would put us on the date of December 11th, which is the date of the executive committee meeting. So I wanted to ask whether we want to have a special meeting for that, to have that discussion.
It's fine with me. So just having grown up in that world, I think a lot of the reason that they've had this 20% cap about money market funds has to do with, might have to do with fees, like paying double fees. Because you pay fees for a money market fund, and then if you're in an actively managed fund, I don't know if it applies to, does it apply to us as, so that's a different situation. So what you're saying is, like, if we hire PFM, tell them to actively manage the portfolio, they put 20% in a money market fund, the reason it's been capped is because if you're paying them 10 basis points to actively manage, and then all they do is go put the money into their mutual fund, their money market fund, then you're paying the money market fees and the active management fees on top of it. It doesn't really make sense.
It's just an
Right. So long as you're paying, I think as long as it's the strategy, like, we're hiring you to run a money market fund and we're paying you just for the money market fund. So in other words, it's like an actively managed fund at which we are unitized as part of a bigger fund. And it makes sense to do that because of the economies of scale that you get.
Well, that all makes sense. However, here's two other pieces of information, three of them. One is, I'm not an expert in this government code and investment policy, so I'm not gonna state a position or read the policy, and I haven't looked it up and found the code, specific code. The two other data points, or at least one other data point, is Schwab, who isn't charging us a management fee and just has all our money in the money market, reached out to me and said, you know, this 20% or this amount of money is out of compliance with your policy. So, and they're not managing, so there's not double fees at Schwab, and they reached out to us to say that we were out of compliance. So I don't really know. I felt like this September 11th meeting might be a good
Yeah.
purpose to actually get all these issues on the table and ask those questions and have Monique tell you what the rules are.
Yes, and so, And is it like per fund? Is it in aggregate?
Yeah, I asked that question. Again, I'm not an expert, but the answer I got was it's the total fund.
Of everything we have? Yeah.
Yeah, you can't get around it by putting 20% at Schwab and 20% at Fidelity and 20%.
Right. So, I will check into this as well. I'll do some research on my end from my people and see what I can figure out. It's a very strange rule because
Yes, I agree.
it forces you sort of into like weirdly riskier stuff.
Well, what her recommendation, that she says what she has recommended to people is that they go into this camp fund, which is kind of like LAIF. But camp fund is basically a pool of money market. What are they, what's the right word when you investment?
Commingled funds?
No, it's, anyway, it's a pool of purchased money market,
Commingled funds. So-
investments.
Okay,
That allows you to, in fact, the earning on it is something about 4 3/4% right now, or 5 1/4, something like that. So the rates are very good because rates are pretty high right now, but that's not something that will continue forever. But it allows you to get around that by investing in basically money market, check the investment person. I can't think of the right word.
indirectly investing.
You can be investing in money market,
So
vehicles.
it's a unitized
Fund.
full account,
Yeah.
like a unitized full account, so,
And Silicon Valley Clean Energy, for example, right now has all of their money in this camp fund. But that's, according to her, that's because they've been really slow to implement what they've agreed is their policy is that they're gonna do a laddered approach, like most people would do. The only time it's been a bad idea was a year and a half ago when the world fell apart.
right. I mean, a laddered approach, all you're gonna do is you're gonna buy securities, like you're gonna buy a 2-year, 18-month, 1 year, 6 month, 3 month, whatever, 1 month. And then you're just, or whatever you're gonna do, or you can just go even month by month, and you're just gonna let it roll off. So as it rolls, so you're never gonna trade it. You're just gonna own it, hold it to the end. It's not the most optimal investment strategy because as the yield curve right now has been so volatile on the short end of the securities, you're sort of stuck with it, but it's fine. So if you invest it 1% at 2 years, and then 2 years goes to 5%, you just hold it and get your 1% for 2 years, where you could have sold it, re-optimized and reinvested in 5%.
And an active managed account,
We
the
do,
manager is looking at it and saying, okay, it's better to sell the 1% and buy the 5% or to hold the 1% to the thing, depending on how much you're gonna lose. That's what a manager does.
or how much you'll, yeah,
Anyway, this conversation, I feel like we should have a meeting,
Okay.
to have it, we could postpone to October because we're already out of compliance. We're not gonna be any less out of compliance, but it does feel like it might be a whole meeting, and therefore I thought it was worthwhile, if everyone's available. So that's the date of the executive committee meeting, so I'm assuming that you would be available on that day.
yeah, I've got it there.
So can you take care of that? Thanks.
Absolutely, same time, 8:30.
8:30.
Thank you.
Hand up.
And Marty, please.
Yes, thank you. City of San Bruno kind of went through something where it's called just looking it up right now, it's a money market sweep account. So Wells Fargo is the bank that is offering this, and so our liquid funds are placed there, and its rate is 4.35%, which is really favorable right now. So it's something that we recently went through. So I was wondering, if it's similar. like, sweep account?
Yeah, we we sweep everything into these accounts, which are all at about that same rate.
Great.
It's just a different vendor than Wells Fargo, right?
Right,
Now,
right.
those sweep accounts are what happened on a daily basis. And so any excess funds sweep into a money market to get better than a checking account.
Right.
And then they sweep back out on a morning, every morning, and then they sweep back in every night till you get overnight. That's typically how sweep accounts work. That's not what we're doing. We're doing this with, and typically use Schwab and Fidelity or things like the money market accounts for liquid investments. We don't really need these investments for some period of time. So, and therefore we could put them in something that's slightly longer, even a month, but it would be better than the fact that their money market account, which is accessible daily. And you can write checks against, but because rates are so high, there hasn't been a lot of motivation for me to do all that because we're still earning almost 5%.
Well, and the yield
on money
curve is weirdly inverted right now. So short-term rates are like much higher than like 0 to 2 year rates are a lot higher right now than like 2 and out. And 10-year, it's like the yield curve goes like this. Usually the yield curve goes.
Right.
Yeah, short-term rates pay low and the longer, the riskier, the higher return you demand. We're on the opposite. We've got a inverted yield curve right now, but like this. So the shorter term rates are higher and the longer term rates are lower. So.
Okay, so we'll set something up and.
Yeah, the 7th is. And the 16th looks good for.
Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the Q4 and end of year financial report. I highlighted it on purpose. It's preliminary, subject to audit. There will likely be some changes. There's always some minimal changes that auditors find. And we already found a $1 million invoice for a program that I don't think was accrued. So we'll probably end up accruing that. So just let you know, these are preliminary. Materially, they shouldn't be far up, but they are preliminary. Next slide, please. This is our regular package that we go through. Total customer load is near budget all year, but 2.5% below budget. Commercial is near budget all year. Residential is well below budget, 5.8%. And it was 15% below budget just in the spring. The first line is probably not, it was probably intended to be something else, but anyway, in total for the year to date, we're 2.5% below all of it in residential. So especially and probably because of the mild spring, and usage has not been as high as we anticipated. Next slide, please. Revenue trends. The second column of numbers shows that revenue, and the highlighted yellow is 106 million for the fourth quarter versus a budget of 75. We were well over in the last quarter as well, even though it says Q2, it should say Q3, but Q4 is correctly titled. So 35 million over in Q3 and 31 million over in Q4. That's the same issue we've been dealing with, and that rates changed in the middle of this year a lot more than we anticipated they would change, and PCI changed a lot more favorably than we anticipated. You can also see this whole year, 428 million versus last year, $239 million of revenues. So almost double in terms of what customers pay PCE. It doesn't mean their electricity rates doubled, because but it does mean that what has been paid to PCE is almost doubled. It just means they paid PG&E less for the PCIA. That's the.
Got it. So it's really,
And it's certainly, I think rates were 30% higher in total, but the shift between how much came to PCE versus PG&E is significant. And that can shift again. And the reason it shifts so much is because PCIA went down by 90%.
yeah.
And it's supposed to go, I don't know if you can calculate it, but it's going to be, we've assumed 0 next year is probably going to be negative. So it's going to be another 100% change from the already 90%, but basically not as much. Next slide, please. This is just which is the same picture, monthly view of the last 13 months. So you can see June of last year versus June of this year. It's been running pretty, not that far off, except that our budget was significantly higher last year, and because we were surprised to the downside a year ago, and now we're surprised to the upside. Next page.
This just goes to show Andy how hard it is to project these PCIA rates and revenue, which all get amalgamated into
Yep.
one.
Totally. This is cost of energy, which is the biggest piece of our expense budget. Very close in the fourth quarter, $500,000 on $60+ million, so very close. We're $6.5 million over, but that happened in the summer of last year with mostly around that big heat wave we had last September. And the other significant thing we're hot over on is resource adequacy are much higher than we budgeted. Fortunately, energy costs are lower than budget, and therefore we're pretty close to it.
And Sean, and you guys are the resource adequacy numbers staying really high. So we're just gonna refactor in higher.
We
RA.
budgeted much higher RA
Okay.
for this coming fiscal
Okay,
year.
great. Well, I think being off 500,000, I mean, it clearly quarter by quarter is pretty volatile, but within a year, that's a pretty tiny little variance.
Yeah, $6.5 million on
Yeah.
270 million. is-
Yeah, for that last quarter. And then total 6.5 over 264, what is that percentage?
Point a quarter of a percent or 2.5%.
To 200%, that's right. So we're in, that's pretty reasonable range of variance.
Next slide, please. This is just a monthly trend. Other than this June, they've been running roughly where they were, 23.9 million in June costs, and last year, June was 23.6, so pretty close. And you can, if you look up September, $36 million in energy costs. That was a bad period, and then the other bad period was, or bad month of December, and that's when gas prices spiked. And electricity prices are driven largely by gas prices. Next slide, please. This is a busy slide, sorry. There's a lot to
We need a bigger monitor.
cover on it.
Okay.
It's coming.
Have it on your iPad
Yes.
or whatever.
Either that or I'm blind as a bat.
I'll just point the highlights. And there should be 3 highlights, but only 2 are circled. So the left 3 columns are the current quarter and the right 3 columns are year to date. So the left 3 columns, revenues were $31 million above plan. And because our energy costs were pretty close to where we thought, and total costs are pretty close to where we budgeted, the change in that position is $30 million too. So that's that bottom circle, left circle. And then year to date is 60 million favorable to budget, all because of revenues as well, or mostly because of revenues. And the only other thing I wanted to point out was on the far right, you see total operating expenses, which is about 5 lines up from the bottom. 297 million actual, 294 million budgeted. That doesn't look like 1.5 million.
It's.
You know, I don't want to say, so apologize. I have to check these when I have someone else do them. But the 60 million is right. One thing this committee will have to do when the audit is complete is the committee and the board have approved a budget, which is total operating expenses, not changing that position and not revenues, but total operating expenses. So this committee and the board approved total operating expenses of $294.4 million. And because we will likely be over in total, and this says 1.5 million, but it looks like it's a little more than that. Yeah.
2,564.
And the audit will likely reveal that we've changed it a little bit more, because I know about one big expense that Raphael walked in that we've been talking about. This committee will need to approve the authorize us to go over that expense number, but we'll deal with that in a couple of months.
Andy, just looking at this, these are Excel spreadsheets, right? And they're formulaic, or is somebody typing in these numbers?
No, they're formulated.
Okay, so that's weird. Yeah,
Yes, I agree, but
we'll figure it out.
I used to do this myself and I don't do it so now I get surprised when it's presented. Well, but I looked at it and thought it was, in fact, I would have looked at it and thought it was about right until I actually start talking about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, next slide, please. This is changing that position year to date, and a comparison over last year. Again, the top portion is where we just were, so $134 million of positive change in that position versus a budget of 73 million, so 60 million favorable. Last year we had $31 million loss for the year. And for this year to date, and 134 million year to date here. So also doesn't look great. Something about that doesn't look right either. Next slide, please. Let me just make a note, please. Couple of notes.
Yeah, I'm writing it down for you.
Which slides I need to talk about?
So those are right, top ones, right?
Yeah, but the year-to-date 2021, 22 doesn't look right to me. And
Got it.
$73 million of revenues doesn't look right, and I don't think we had a $31 million loss last year. I think it was 8 or 13 for the year, I think, if I recall.
Got it.
Next slide, I believe is right. So we have cash at the end of June of 254 million, which is the equivalent of 312 days of cash on hand. Our policy is 180 days today, which puts us at $107 million over our current reserve policy. And as you know, there's discussion going on about potentially doing something with that excess funds or funds above what is required. The following slide is hard to read.
Sorry, Andy, I'm gonna ask you to go back. Sorry, go back one if you would. Sorry, so where we're landing here is at 107 million in unrestricted excess. Is that?
I need to look at that. Where you're going with this, I know the 89 million that was in question would have been based upon a budgeted level instead of the year ending level. And would be based, the 89 million is based on next year's ending number as opposed to this past year's ending number. And yeah, and
All right,
so
we'll chat.
they're apples and oranges. So we have to look at what we would want to do to determine if that 89 million is what the right number is
for surplus funds.
is take the year ending numbers and apply them to the budget and then have the budget roll out what that number would look like based upon all the budget assumptions that are in FY24.
Got it.
Okay, yeah.
Because the budgeted numbers you're looking at were based upon an April forecast of June as opposed to actual.
Got it.
And this is an actual June total, well, cashing, everything else.
Very good. So our plan is to have more specificity when the group comes back together in September.
Correct.
Thank you.
Sure. This is just next page, next slide. This is again, very small, but just as a summary of where our assets and cash is. So the top portion is the combined First Republic Management, Investment Management and PFM Investment Management that is held at US Bank is $124 million as of June. And then there's a little side note there that gives the split. So PFM is 64 million and FRB 60. And then there's all the other accounts that we have. So there's $62,000 at Wilmington, which I need to go close the account. I thought we had, but obviously there's some leftover interest. And then there's about $30+ million at First Republic, and then 50 million roughly at Fidelity and 46 million at Schwab. There's actually an additional 10 million, I think, that we sent to Schwab. I can't remember Schwab and Fidelity, but that happened after June 30th, it happened in July. So that we've been trying to keep the operating Schwab. We're trying to keep the operating account at First Republic somewhere between 20 and 30 million. And then, so the total there is $2,254 million. Any questions other than correct the errors? Okay. Next slide, please. We have been Sorry.
Public comment, you moving to another item?
He was about to.
Okay, let's take public comment on this. Very many. Got anything over there? Yeah, okay. Doesn't look like there's any hands on the board, right? Okay. Okay. Can I just ask one quick question here? The note of the 14.7 million cash on deposit with ISO and not collected in summary. So that is just what we are required to have on hand for them.
We're not required. The number that we're required to have is based upon current activity, and our most recent activity would require a total collateral deposit of about $6 to $8 million. I can't remember. We have right now collateral with them 18 million because I think we've been given $3 or $4 million of unsecured credit there. And then we have $14.7 million of cash there. So we're probably over deposited there by probably $8 or $10 million at the moment. However, we're in the summer when our collateral requirements will increase and they pay interest on it. And
So why not?
there's not a lot of reason to keep sending it back and forth, so
Yeah.
we've been leaving it there.
Okay, that's great. That's
But
really appreciated.
but it is 14.7 million of
Okay,
cash that's on deposit at CAISO.
but we don't roll that out here or how?
No,
like-
because it's in the same way, it's a deposit for our building and a deposit for
Okay,
some,
Yeah,
for
it's like,
other things, it's a deposit. I just thought it was, because it's a big number and.
Yeah.
I
yeah, it's
mentioned it.
important to say. Yeah, so I get what you're saying. It's like, police deposit or anything. It's held as, an asset, but not, it's held as a different kind of reclassified. It's not held as a,
Right, and we could actively manage it and request back $8 million and then wait
I
till,
get you.
but what they do is when they do make a collateral call, we have to pay it in 2 days. And so we end up
Yeah.
scrambling to pay it
It's
back.
actually good to have it there right now.
I think that's actually good to know, though, that we're sort of we have a little hedge there that they're not gonna get called. And also that it is money sitting there that should, for some reason, we really needed it, we couldn't call it.
We could call it anytime and they're very quick to send it back.
Okay, great.
Okay. Can I move on?
Mhm.
Okay, next slide, please. We have been looking at Sean's request at policy 14 and policy 17, which are policy 14 spells out who can approve or sign contracts that can commit PCE, and policy 17 spells out who must review and approve invoices to authorize payment and how that payments can be authorized. as you know, PC has grown and matured and there's more management and middle management and we felt, and Sean was looking to streamline some of the activities. So we're proposing changes to both of those policies. Next slide, please. Policy 14, the current policy is the CEO can approve any current contract commitment up to 100,000 if the commitment is included in the already board approved budget. Over 100,000 for a contract has to come to the full board. And the current policy is the CFO can approve any contract commitment or operating or general and administrative expenses up to 100,000 if included in the approved budget. So only for certain expenses. And we are proposing that the CEO, the COO, and the CFO can approve any contract or commitment of 100,000, any for anything, so they're consistent across the way instead of trying to figure out what is operating or general and what's not. And but we feel like there's enough maturity and organization and control that this is warranted.
Comments, anyone, or thoughts? I think it makes sense. Marty?
It does make sense, but to complete the loop, after somebody does the approval, who's informed that it happened?
There is informed, depends on what you mean by informed, who is informed. First of all, let me look at one thing before I say something. The policy, even the revised policy requires, upon request by the board of directors, the CFO will prepare a monthly written report of all things, but we made it upon request instead of having to do it on everyone. This policy does not authorize payment. It just authorizes the signing of a contract or commitment of an expense. And the payment, actual payment is done by multiple levels, and we're going to get to that in a
Yeah,
second.
that was the next policy.
And that's great, I just wanted one follow-up. And maybe it'll be covered later, but what I've seen that has happened at the city level is that someone authorizes something to a certain amount. Then they go back and repeat that amount to keep it under the 100,000. Just want to make sure that we have the language to protect that from happening. And that can be addressed later, but.
So in other words, if you're asking is a contract or commitment up to 100,000 if including the approved budget. So the question is it in each individual circumstance or cumulative?
Yeah, so let me, first of all, let me respond to the anecdotal, because I also have an anecdote. There was the city manager of San Jose was indicted for doing exactly this kind of thing, by the way, at one point, some time ago, because so I'm very sensitive to it. The language in the agreement says, or the policy says the following. CEO, CFO may approve and enter into any contract agreement if the total amount payable under the agreement is less than 100,000 in any fiscal year. So that is under the agreement. Now, that doesn't preclude completely separate agreements. So there's no policy that's going to be foolproof totally, but this is mostly getting at that.
So
No, I'm
like,
not, by the way, I don't think it personally, because I know that.
But
It's not intended,
No,
it's
not at all.
it's from experience
Yeah.
on the council, like, okay. The worst thing is like, well, somebody approved that, well. How did the CEO know? Well, that's the CEO approved that, and that didn't move back, it's like,
right,
oh, but there was 3 contracts of 900 or
So, and
95,000.
then one more piece before I do quiet and let other people talk. And the approval amount is included in the then current fiscal year's board approved budget. So that's another factor kind of overriding it and putting a window on it.
right.
But there isn't any policy that's going to be foolproof and prevent somebody from violating a policy too.
Right. You have to validate
Before
all
creating
the
it.
time.
Okay, but I'm gonna make just a quick comment, we'll talk later. To your point, I think it would be smart for us just internally, if we're gonna expand who's able to approve, that we also just keep a record, so monthly or whatever. the top three will be working together closely, but I think it should just come as part of a report. So the left hand always knows what the right hand's doing.
Right, and the report should be
That's an internal.
not just by the month, but should be, like, you should have a monthly and then a cumulative, both. So you can see, like, here's what we've paid, you know.
That's different than payments.
Contractor, your date. Now, that sends me to a different question, which is 100,000 enough, because these are already things we've approved in the budget. 100,000 gets used up pretty quickly. I want to make sure there's enough. We've had it since the very beginning at 100 for 7 years.
But I do believe, and I have to check for sure, but I believe the JPA would have
The
100,000.
in JPA.
So if that's true, then we need to change the JPA as well.
Let's just keep a running tab, Sean, on things that the JPA, you know, could be coming up against the JPA, like, you know, just time issues, right? That we might need to up that number to 150,000 to catch it up with inflation and kind of everything else that's gone up, so that we're not bumping up against it all the time, where you guys are creating. There's a purpose here, which is right, so it doesn't have to keep coming to the board all the time, and it's approved budget, there's a process, but let's just make sure it's the right number.
Well, I will tell you that coming to the board, first of all, is a slightly bit more pain, but there's some contracts that we've been bringing, that are over 100,000 that we've been bringing on consent too.
Yeah.
And the board then can decide whether they want to take it off consent, but
100%.
we've been exercising some level of, you know, discretion to determine whether it should go to the consent or not consent. So are you suggesting that in terms of this report, do you want to put that in the policy, that is not just that we basically take the words out upon request by the board, but prepare a report of all these contracts?
So what you're saying, John, what were you saying? Is that what you were asking for?
So my thought here would be that we would not change the language in the policy, but that we would have an internal operating policy that requires weekly or monthly, and then a cumulative report that goes to the CFO, CEO. Just because what Marty is pointing out here is a need. It's all fine, I think,
Checking backwards.
to expand that. We're trying to build, not redundancy, but, you know, back up and deputize people. So, yeah, I wouldn't recommend changing that. I would say it's an internal.
Well, if we did,
Agree.
Yes.
if we did the internal policy, what you're suggesting, that would at least enable us to easily respond to a board request.
Correct.
Because we would have it, we
Yeah.
would have it available.
Yeah.
Correct.
But
I think that seems reasonable, Sean. You don't have to codify that in the board policy. You guys can just
Internal.
internally make that your policy, so you all know what you're doing.
It's just a smart thing to do.
Well, also, yeah, in case someone's approving these contracts over here, maybe it's the same vendor, but we don't know. So yeah, whatever is comfortable for you, and I think those will work. Okay, so do we want a resolution recommending that the board of directors approve the revised, a public comment, please? Any public comment? Anyone up there raising hands? No public comment. Don't see any. Any public comment?
Next slide, please.
So we just need a resolution recommending that the board of directors approve the revised policy. All right,
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to approve the resolution recommending that the board of directors approve the revised policy number 14.
second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Unanimously approved by the board of directors here. Sean, will this go up to the full board for approvals? Okay.
It will, I was hoping that we put it on consent because
I
of
would put
that.
it on. I would put it on consent with a unanimous recommendation
That's right.
from the finance.
It was in-
Yeah.
I'm just confirming that indeed the 100,000 is in the JPA. So,
Okay, great.
so
Okay,
there
so
may
let's
be
just
a
leave-
list of administrative things we want to change over time with the JPA.
Yeah.
We could do that as a package.
I would agree. I would agree. Just keep a running little file when you. take
Yeah.
over.
And that becomes harder to, that's why I thought that was in there, and that's why it's harder to change that, like, this is
Right.
easier to change, but that's harder to change.
100%. But there are some
And
other
it's
things
workable,
we've been
actually.
talking about at the JPA level that we might need to look at. So. that'd be good. Okay, next item. propose revisions to policy 17.
So policy 17 deals with who can approve invoices and release payments. So we're in this policy, we're not changing the current policy that requires a manager or director of each area or closest to approve the invoice. And we're not changing the policy to require final approval by the CFO or the CFO of every invoice. We are kind of delineating who can approve and what the different levels are. So there's 3 different kinds of invoices or categories that we've created. Invoices that are not related to power resources, invoices that are related to power resources administration, and invoices related to energy and electricity procurement, which are typically much larger. Go to the next slide, please.
So can you give me just real quick
Sure.
examples? So
Sure.
invoices not
Go back.
related to power resources would be like the rent payment or like, you know,
Rent payment,
coffee we buy, stock
invoice.
kitchen,
Marketing.
program expenses,
program expenses.
rebates to customers,
And then invoices related to power resource administrative activities might be like, we hire a lawyer to help us review.
yes, and or forecasting services, who's the scheduling coordinator services.
Mhm.
And those are not related, the contract, for example, scheduling coordinator, the approval of the contract would go to policy 14.
Got it.
But the monthly payment might be $25,000 or $30,000, and who's approving that expense?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And then the last one, invoices related to energy and electricity procurement are obviously the payments we're making to the right energy and whoever we're.
Different power providers.
Our power providers.
Yeah,
Okay.
and by the way, coming up, I'll have examples of the last 2.
Okay.
Okay, so next slide, please. So this is related to, not related to power resource activity. So up to $10,000, level 1 is responsible area or manager. So sometimes we have utility bill or something like that, that Nellie's approving up to $10,000. If something is $10,000 to $100,000, it requires Nellie and a responsible area director as well. In this case, there isn't the director for that particular one, so there wouldn't be, but in some cases like Raphael, the manager would approve, and manager or director, and then the director for sure. And then over 100,000 requires CEO or COO approval is required. And the COO can approve invoices related to their responsibility. And then following all of those required approvals, the CFO for sure always reviews and approves every single invoice. So even if the CEO approved, I'm still approving.
Great.
Okay.
And we have not, at any point in time yet, have we had any, like, I'm sure you catch little thises or that's, but it all's run smoothly so far.
What's all, that's pretty broad statement.
Since I've been doing it,
We
yes.
haven't, we're not having any issues, and we do sometimes catch things
Which
and
is perfect.
wrong invoices sometimes. But things have been running very smoothly,
Okay.
and some of the things that we're adopting here
Mhm.
are things that we're following, but we're not completely in compliance.
Okay.
This is our practice. I would say that the other thing that's good about this is that it's a checks and balance. It can go quickly. We've had a couple of internal meetings about, when is your deadline to get those approvals in and
Mhm.
make sure that everything is flowing.
Mm-hmm.
But also it allows, so a couple times in the last couple of weeks I've said, hey, this looks high. Can we stop and tell us why?
Mhm.
And so that all then gets answered along the way. So I feel like this process right here
Mhm.
is the true checks and balance for what's going out the door.
Yeah, I think this is great.
Okay, next. So this next slide is things that are not related to power resources, but more administration. So here's a list of those things: consultants, legal, forecasting, scheduling, subscriptions. And then sometimes we have minor penalties and interest related to CPUC or something like that, or customer contracts or something like that. Up to $10,000 responsible area manager or director. 10,000 to 100,000 is the same directors. This is Roy in most cases. Over 100,000 is the CEO, so these are the same as this is administrative expenses related to power resources, which is different than power resources. And then following that, again, the CFO is required. So this is largely the same as the other area. And then lastly, next slide. Our expenses related to KISO, hedge and PPAs, RECs and carbon-free, resource adequacy, and other PPAs. This one is the only change we're making, is up to $3 million, level 1 and level 2. So responsible area manager and the director. So this would be Moya, if you know Moya, and Roy. And then up to over $3 million requires the CEO to approve. And I look back at the last 10 months from July 1 through April 30th, there were 378 payments that fall into these 5 categories. And 14 were over 3 million. So many of them are under 100,000. 137 were under 100,000. The reality of these goes through there's actually another level of check. So there's a junior analyst at checking the volumes and making sure that the amounts are right. The manager looks at them and makes sure that that checking went right. Roy does a review. And by the time it gets to Sean, and in this case, over 3 million requires Sean's approval, she's kind of looking for
Anomalies.
yeah, things that might be out of sync, but not really doing a review and not really adding a lot of, no offense,
What?
not adding a lot of value to her time to be looking at it, because she just doesn't have the context for the
Right.
details of what's happening at the energy usage level.
Right.
So we feel like it's getting a ton of scrutiny before then.
And this was a major bottleneck before, like I have to say, we're also correcting for a bottleneck that.
Right,
was going
What's the current? What's the change? Is it the 3 million?
Before, the prior CEO was approving every single invoice.
That was and the CFO.
I always approve every single invoice.
See if.
But I'm not as much of a bottleneck as the CEO, because I don't have, there's many things called.
Leslie, I think when we first started, it was so much smaller, there was so fewer invoices.
Yeah.
That it was probably okay, but then we got in the practice of it, and then it became untenable for the staff after it got to a certain high level. So I appreciate that Sean's kind of brought this up to the attention so we can fix this. And Sean, I think probably and Andy, yeah, well, Andy brought it
Because we're having to deal with it.
yeah, you're having to deal with it. And I've been hearing about this a little bit too, so this is great that you brought this up, but also Sean, I think at that high level of the 14, for the big ones, it's really just more of like a transparency issue, I think, that we're just making sure that for those really big numbers, Sean, you're almost just more like aware of what those numbers are and where they're going out and who's getting paid these big amounts, more so than you're gonna say like, are we really sure we're supposed to be paying them 28 million? It's just so you're more aware.
Yeah, and there's also one more check that happens that we haven't gotten to, it's the next slide, but it has to do with payment. And any payment, whether it's $20,000 or $3 million that goes out in a wire, Sean's releasing the wire. So even if it's $2 million and Sean wasn't involved in the approval.
Yeah.
There was 3 levels of approval, including mine. The release of a wire is actually happening with Sean, and let me just go, I don't have that.
Well, Andy, on that, just because both of you weren't here when we had some issues on this. So when we first got here, Leslie, one of the first things I was really worried about was the process by which money was wired and transferred, only because I'm aware of how much training most organizations do around phishing and illicit. And we were subject to that and we didn't have, like, I had been arguing for the controls, so controls weren't in place. And then we had a situation. So we were able to correct it and remedy it and we solved it, but the good news was that created the impetus by which we began to formulate a lot of these controls systems in place. And we hadn't brought Andy on yet, we didn't have anyone in, you know, so it was sort of me yelling. But we got it done and it's good. Are we doing training for our staff? We do training now.
Yes,
don't we?
yes.
About, yeah,
Couple
yes.
times.
So I want to do training actually weirdly for Eric's company because I can be, I mean, not that I'm involved in that loop, but he's always shared it with me, just like, hey, in case you ever get these weird emails, like they can kind of almost permeate like personal stuff to people. So I was seeing how much training was getting done, and this is why we brought this protocol in-house. And
That's
I'm
good.
really happy about it because we are very vulnerable because we're a public agency and there's so much transparency around money and funding and where our monies are and who our people are that are operating. That we need to treat ourselves like a publicly traded company.
The wire transfers, the way, I should have put it here, but I didn't, but I'm gonna tell you how it works. The wire transfers are, unless someone's not available, but most of the time everyone's available. Wires are set up in three levels of scrutiny. So Mike Maher, the county sets up all wires. I approve all wires. And I only approve them if all the process of approving expenses have happened appropriately in our billing system. And then Sean does the release of the wires. So there's 3 levels of check before they go out.
And there hasn't been a problem where some minor vendor insists on a wire, like, you know, for $20 CVS bill or.
Yeah, there hasn't been any minor, and first of all, we would resist that. But we also, when we do, and they do ask for it, we do a verbal check of the wire instructions with a contact. So we make a phone call.
Yeah.
In fact, I call, and if I don't get somebody, I make them tell me in an email what number to call. So I then call back, because I don't want someone calling me.
Right. So we've really enhanced this protection. I don't think we've had any issues since then.
But there's no foolproof system. I mean,
There's always so much guidance.
yes.
Yeah. Eric told me that on their systems, they get on average, like, it's crazy, like 2,000 potential hacks in an hour. Like trying to get into their systems. So I assure you, there are outside forces looking at our stuff, but the more we
I
can.
get texts daily from somebody.
Yeah, there's always
Your
something.
package, you need your package.
Right. You
Your Amazon account has been hacked.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
really appreciate it.
so that's the end of and the next slide is a request to approve resolution of recommending the board.
Leslie, you want to make a motion on that?
Yeah, I'll make a motion that we.
Let's request public comment before we,
Thank you so much.
It's our new legal counsel.
Oh, thank
so
you
hello,
very much.
everyone. Kelsey Malura from the County Attorney's Office.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, it's because we've had does anyone on the video screen want to make a public comment on this new policy change and recommendation? No hands raised, Emily? Okay, anyone in the audience? No, just as for the public record too, we have, oh, I see, there is one. David has, so we have one person sitting from the public, it's Marty's lovely son here. So Dave, can I have your comment, please? Dave Mora.
Yes, good morning, Audit Committee. Thanks for taking my comment here. Yeah, I think this is a good recommendation to go forward with. I believe that to streamline the effect of the process there, I think this is totally in line with what's going on in today's world. So I would be in favor of this recommendation.
Thank you, Dave. Appreciate it. Is there anyone else that has a public comment? Let's see any other hands raised. Great, so we can take a motion.
That we recommend to the board to
Thank you. Second by Marty. All those in favor? Policy adopted unanimously. We'll make that recommendation on consent as well. Up to the, okay, looks like we're gonna end this meeting early today. Any committee member reports or discussions on anything? Leslie, I might ask you, are you enjoying your time? Okay, great, not on the line. Well, thank you for being such an active participant and please give about everything. Do you guys have anything you want on a future agenda item or anything that you're worried about or you wanna hold on or go through? I will report back quickly that we had our second meeting with the
Surplus funds.
surplus fund committee. We have somebody committee, I can't remember the names. And I thought, Sean, you did a really nice job, and you were on that too, Andy, right? Sean and Andy were both on that, did a really nice job. It's working via Zoom. And I thought everyone was incredible. You were on that closely, Marty. Everyone was really collaborative. Everybody was very sort of part out. Everybody was very collaborative. Everybody was very thoughtful about how they discussed this and sensitive to all the other participants' questions and wants and needs. The meeting went right within time, and we seem to be really on track to try to sort of come up with an overall strategy.
And will that recommendation come to the board within the next couple months?
We're shooting the next couple months.
Next couple of months, yeah. And interestingly, I think the sort of general consensus about how they're kind of moving is that to try to figure out ways in which to broadly impact the clients in the sense of helping create more structural ways to reduce carbon and structural ways to reduce the cost of electricity, as opposed to just sort of one-time situation.
Lasting it.
Yeah, right. They want to create more lasting investments into the system that will perpetuate it, which seems to be really, really good. So that's really the only committee that we had a plug out of. Do you have any other?
I do not. I have a brief report on that for but I'll just say that things are going well. I do want to acknowledge Andy, because 70% of Andy is worth 100% of a lot of other people,
Oh, yeah.
you know, so
No,
Thank
we've
you
really
for-
been fortunate to have you come back, Andy, and
Yeah.
thank you for all this and.
I sleep better.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when the whatever's going on with those numbers, we'll just figure those out. You send out a revised report via email to everybody
Yeah, that was it.
next time. Okay, very good, thank you. That's it. We'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting until
September's not the same because
we need anything else.
the excess over the 300 days.
Right.
This is the excess over the.
Okay.
Right.